That night, Keith Green went out to attend an important meeting, not knowing it would be the last time he would be seen. The next morning, his phone was found abandoned in Golden Gate Park. No trace, no message. As police followed each lead, they all pointed to a cold, premeditated murder. But when the trial ended, the nation was shocked. The accused walked free. It was a story that made everyone ask, is justice ever fair? Or is it only for the rich? At approximately 9:00 p.m., on April 28, 2016, Keith Green and Tiffany Lee met at Millbrae Pancake House, a small restaurant about a 30-minute drive from their former home in Hillsborough. They planned to discuss the custody of their 2 daughters. However, the conversation shifted, and Keith requested $4,000 per month in alimony from Tiffany, along with one of their BMW cars. He claimed these requests were to ensure their daughter's comfort when staying with him, preventing them from experiencing a significant decrease in their standard of living. The discussion lasted approximately 1 hour. Tiffany left the restaurant before Keith. The following morning, the 29th of April, around 10:00 a.m., a passerby discovered an unattended cell phone in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. The phone was identified as belonging to Keith Green. This discovery was puzzling because the park was a considerable distance from Hillsborough, and Keith had no apparent reason to be there. Friends and family attempted to contact Keith by phone, but he did not answer. Tiffany also stated that she had not heard from him since they left the restaurant. By that evening, missing person flyers featuring Keith's picture were being distributed throughout the city. At the time of his disappearance, Keith was wearing black sweatpants and a white jacket with green sleeves. He had tattoos of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X on his legs. The search moved quickly. The case took on greater urgency when it became clear that Keith hadn't returned to the friend's home where he'd been staying temporarily, nor to any relatives. None of his bank accounts had been touched, and his phone was switched off. From the moment he walked out of the diner, it was as if Keith had simply vanished. Keith Andrew Green was born on July 19, 1989, and raised in San Mateo, California. He was from a working-class family. After his parents' divorce, he lived with his mother, Colleen Cudd, although they didn't have much money. Keith was energetic and sociable. In high school, he was a talented athlete, particularly in football. As the star quarterback at Aragon High School, he led his team to an undefeated season and a playoff win in 2005. His athletic skills earned him a partial scholarship to Eastern Washington University, where he continued to play football. However, he had difficulty keeping up with his coursework and the rigorous training demands of college sports. Ultimately, he withdrew from the university before graduating. After returning to California, Keith had some run-ins with the law. As a minor, he got involved in a scheme involving the fraudulent use of Macy's gift cards. While he didn't face severe legal penalties, the incident hurt his reputation and future prospects. In early 2009, Keith met Tiffany, a young woman from a rich Chinese family in Hillsborough, California. Although they had different backgrounds and lifestyles, they started dating. Within a year, they moved into a lavish house in a very exclusive neighborhood, worth about $7 million. Tiffany's mother had given her the house as a gift. This was a huge change for Keith, who went from living simply to enjoying luxury every day: expensive cars, household help, a nanny, and a personal driver. Keith and Tiffany have 2 daughters. From the outside, they seem like the ideal family. However, Keith wasn't steadily employed and depended on Tiffany's family for money. He said he wanted to focus on self-improvement. With Tiffany's support, he enrolled at Le Cordon Bleu in Pasadena, a well-known and costly culinary school. He was scheduled to finish his studies in September 2016 and intended to start a restaurant career. Tiffany paid for his tuition, which was approximately $40,000 per year. Despite their apparent success, problems were developing. Keith felt insecure because he relied on the Lee family for money, and this caused friction. People close to Tiffany said she started seeing Keith less as a father to her children and more as someone just spending her money. In early 2015, Keith and Tiffany's relationship began to fall apart. Keith was drinking and using marijuana. He still couldn't find a steady job. His culinary school training didn't make up for his financial and emotional reliance on Tiffany. They argued more and more often. They officially separated in October 2015. Keith moved in with a friend, but wanted to stay involved in his daughter's lives. He also tried to maintain their previous lifestyle, possibly for both their benefit and his own. However, Tiffany controlled most of the money and decisions, which made Keith feel increasingly disconnected and saddened. To better understand the story, let's learn about Tiffany's life. She was born in Beijing, China. Tiffany grew up in a wealthy family whose primary business was real estate. They owned residential and commercial properties in major Chinese cities, including a skyscraper in Beijing. Over time, the family expanded their investments to the US, the Caribbean, and other international markets. Besides real estate, they also invested in logistics, high-tech companies, and global trade. Their interests included shipping and electronic supply chains. This diverse investment strategy helped them to steadily increase their wealth. Tiffany's early years were split between two countries. She spent much of her childhood in China, attending elite private schools that emphasized strict discipline, high academic expectations, and a strong sense of hierarchy. She studied piano, practiced ballet, and participated in competitions. Concurrently, her parents introduced her to business matters from an early age, gradually involving her in family investment discussions. In 1992, Tiffany's family settled permanently in California's Silicon Valley. Then, she became a US citizen in 2000. She graduated from a private high school and later earned a master's degree in business from the University of San Francisco. Despite fully integrating into American life, her family maintained close cultural and financial ties to China. In the early 2010s, Tiffany managed her family's real estate in California. She was responsible for several properties, including their Hillsborough mansion, which they had bought before moving to the city. Hillsborough View was chosen for its safety, reputation, privacy, and wealthy residents who didn't need to show off. Tiffany's social background, education, and perfect English allowed her to easily fit in with the local upper class. She went to charity events, joined parent groups at private schools, networked with business owners and lawyers. People saw her as a confident and independent woman from a prominent family. Her behavior reflected her dual background. She was reserved, strategic, but also friendly in public, and very disciplined in business. Tiffany was an only child, so she felt immense pressure from her parents. They expected her to inherit the family business, expand it internationally, and secure its future. Tiffany shaped her life around these expectations. She stayed out of trouble, avoided attention, and showed no desire to break free from her family's wealth. Instead, she worked hard to be seen as someone dedicated to protecting and increasing their fortune. Having a dual cultural identity was both beneficial and challenging for her. She was able to leverage the advantages of both Chinese discipline and American adaptability. However, the strong expectations of her family sometimes conflicted with her own desires. This created tension in her romantic relationships, particularly when her partners didn't meet her family's approval. Tiffany started a relationship with Kaveh Bayat. Tiffany said this happened after she and Keith had broken up for good. However, others said she was seeing Kaveh Bayat while she was still with Keith. When Keith learned about Kaveh Bayat, it made his conflict with Tiffany much worse. Kaveh Bayat then moved into the house where Keith used to live with his daughters, which Keith felt was a deliberate provocation. Their relationship became even more hostile, with Tiffany and Keith constantly arguing and accusing each other of manipulating the situation. There were also rumors that Keith threatened to reveal damaging information about Tiffany, possibly about her new relationship or business dealings, unless his demands were met. These threats made it impossible for Tiffany and Keith to cooperate in any way. Keith was in a difficult position. He lacked a stable job and home, and struggled to see his daughters regularly. Many people doubted his sincerity. He openly expressed his frustration and desperation, but he remained determined to be part of his daughters' lives. Even as his situation worsened, he stayed in California to be near his children, refusing to move in with family elsewhere. By the end of April 2016, despite appearing to communicate, Keith and Tiffany no longer trusted each other. They saw each other as opponents with conflicting goals. From the very start of the investigation into Keith Green's disappearance, Tiffany Lee was considered a possible person of interest. However, concrete leads only emerged after the interrogation of Olivier Adela, a close associate of Tiffany, and her new partner, Kaveh Bayat. Olivier, a former MMA fighter and owner of a transportation company, had initially been hired as a personal trainer and later as a bodyguard. He would become a key figure in revealing the events leading to the crime. During questioning, Olivier confessed in detail to the crime. He admitted he wasn't there when it happened, but knew who did it and how. He said that on the 28th of April, 2016, he followed Tiffany and Keith after they left the Millbury restaurant. Tiffany was driving, with Keith as a passenger. GPS data confirms Olivier's statement that he followed them that night, contrary to Tiffany's original story, that she dropped Keith off somewhere along the way. Olivier stated that she took Keith all the way to her house in Hillsborough. Investigators believe the crime occurred at Tiffany's home. Olivier claims he was driving behind them but didn't participate in the crime. Though he knew it was going to happen, Kaveh Bayat claims he shot Keith in the head with a 9mm handgun in the garage of their home. Blood evidence in the garage and one of the family's cars confirmed Keith was there. After the shooting, the body was put in a vehicle. The following day, Tiffany and Kaveh asked Olivier to get rid of the body. Olivier agreed because he felt he was already too involved and saw it as repayment for the money, gifts, and loyalty they had given him. He drove the body to a secluded, wooded area in Sonoma County. 2 weeks later, the body was found. Forensic experts determined Keith died somewhere else. The most important part of Olivier's statement was his claim that the crime was planned months beforehand. He stated that Tiffany and Kaveh had asked him to kill Keith as early as February 2016. When Olivier came to see them, they took his phone and searched him to make sure he wasn't recording them. As a precaution, Olivier said he refused to kill Keith himself but agreed to pressure him, saying he didn't want to go too far. However, he continued to communicate with Tiffany and Kaveh, assist them in other ways. Later, when they asked him to get rid of the body, he agreed because he felt he couldn't refuse. Investigators confirmed his involvement. Blood matching Keith's DNA was found in the trunk of Olivier's car. Surveillance footage also showed all three moving in sequence, first toward Tiffany's home, then to the remote location where the body was later found. The evidence of premeditation became the backbone of the prosecution's case. The search uncovered messages between Tiffany and Kaveh indicating they had been working together. The murder weapon itself was never recovered. However, the wound characteristics and trajectory led experts to conclude that a 9mm handgun had been used. Additional, though not conclusive, evidence came from gunpowder residue found in the garage where, according to Olivier, the shot was fired. Olivier's confession formed the basis for arresting all three suspects. His detailed knowledge of the transport of the body and facts only a participant could know proved his active role rather than mere presence at the scene. Olivier's testimony was obtained as part of a preliminary agreement with the district attorney's office. He agreed to cooperate in hopes of reducing his own sentence, an arrangement that would later play a pivotal role in the case. Early in the investigation, authorities believed they had enough proof to determine that Keith Green's death was not accidental or the result of a spontaneous fight. The investigators determined the crime was planned in advance, with each of the three suspects assigned a specific role. Tiffany was initially questioned on May 4th. When asked about the GPS data showing her traveling the same route as Keith on the night of his death, she denied knowing why and maintained that they had separated after dinner. However, investigators already had a different understanding of what happened, and her responses only increased their suspicion that she was hiding something. Around the same time, Cave was also questioned. He denied any involvement, claiming that he was at home on the night Keith went missing. However, his cell phone data placed him in the same area where Tiffany and Keith's movements were recorded, and later near Olivier's residence. He had also been exchanging messages with Tiffany throughout the evening of the 28th of April. This contradicted his version of events and heightened investigators' doubts. On May 26, 2016, Tiffany Lee, Cave Bayat, and Olivier Adela were all arrested. They were charged based on false statements, inconsistencies in their stories, cell phone data, biological evidence, surveillance video, and suspicious messages. However, key pieces of evidence were still missing, such as the murder weapon, a recording of the crime, or a confession from the actual shooter. Despite being charged together, each suspect's legal case progressed separately. Tiffany was the first person granted bail in the case. Prosecutors worried she might leave the country and requested a very high bail amount. Because Tiffany had dual citizenship in the US and China, substantial financial assets, and property in other countries, the court set her bail at an unusually high $35 million. This was one of the largest bail amounts ever in San Mateo County. California law allows a defendant to be released by paying 10% of the bail in cash, with property covering the rest. Within 2 weeks, Lee's family raised the money by using California real estate as collateral and paying some of the amount in cash. Tiffany was released on June 8, 2016, and was monitored electronically and not allowed to leave the country. The public responded quickly and strongly. Newspapers and social media buzzed with discussions about whether the situation was fair. A wealthy woman, accused of planning a crime in advance, was allowed to go home. Meanwhile, the other 2 defendants stayed in jail. Activists, the victim's family, and people fighting for equal rights claimed this case showed how much better options rich people have compared to everyone else. Articles started to ask if the justice system could ever be truly fair, if being rich could buy your freedom. As the trial approached, the prosecution faced a significant hurdle. They had no direct physical proof linking Tiffany to the crime. Instead, their case relied on circumstantial evidence, including messages, witness statements, traces of blood, but no murder weapon, crime scene video, or Tiffany's fingerprints at the location. Their main task was to present this indirect evidence in a compelling way. The defense attorneys presented a different argument. Tiffany's lawyers claimed the case was based on guesses, not proven facts. They highlighted that Tiffany's DNA wasn't found in the garage where the crime supposedly happened, and there were no fingerprints or a murder weapon linking her to it. They stated that there was no clear evidence connecting her to the crime. They also expressed worry about prejudice, implying that people suspected her because of her ethnicity and wealth. Cave's defense relied on similar arguments: insufficient evidence, no direct link between him and Keith's body, and no trace of his biological material at the suspected crime scene. His lawyers emphasized that simply exchanging text messages with Tiffany could not be equated with carrying out the crime. For Olivier, the strategy was different. His decision to cooperate as a witness strengthened the prosecution's case, but also created a vulnerability. His testimony could be seen as the result of pressure or an attempt to avoid prison time. From the very beginning, even during the initial hearings, it was obvious that the trial would be a major event. The case involved sensitive topics like violent death, family arguments, money, immigration, legal strategies, and unfair social differences, which were sure to attract a lot of public interest. Both the prosecution and defense used all available legal, financial, and media resources to try to win. Under the court's guidance, Tiffany stayed out of the public eye and only communicated through her lawyer's official announcements. Cave and Olivier remained in jail awaiting trial. Although their cases were initially separate, they were combined into one trial. This allowed the prosecutors to present a single, coherent explanation of the crime. The main trial in the Keith Green case began that September in San Mateo County Superior Court. Tiffany and Cave were the defendants, with Olivier's testimony forming the backbone of the prosecution's organized conspiracy theory. According to prosecutors, the motive was Tiffany's desire to eliminate a former partner she saw as a threat to her reputation and financial stability. Olivier's testimony was the most important part of the trial. Under oath, he confirmed Cavey and Tiffany's involvement in the alleged plot. However, during cross-examination, the defense exposed inconsistencies. For example, he couldn't clearly explain why, after Keith's death, he first drove home and only later returned for the body. The absence of definitive proof placing him face-to-face with Tiffany and Cavey at the moment of the crime was another weakness. Questions also arose regarding Olivier's finances. A search of his home uncovered $30,000 in cash and expensive items, including a watch that had belonged to Keith. Olivier claimed the money came from his work and personal savings. But this explanation was met with skepticism. The defense argued that he could have been more than an accomplice, possibly even the direct perpetrator. Acting alone, the prosecution maintained that the evidence formed a clear chain motive: planning, execution, concealment, and coordinated actions by the participants. The defense countered that not a single piece of physical evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA, no weapon, directly proved Tiffany had committed the crime or was present when it happened. Meanwhile, the court also considered the case of Cavey Bayat. His defense categorically denied any involvement in the crime. He maintained his innocence, claiming he had been at home at the time of the case. His attorneys argued that the prosecution had not presented a single piece of physical evidence placing him at the scene. After weeks of testimony, the trial reached its decisive stage. The jury now had to decide whether the evidence presented was strong enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. After Olivier Adela testified, the murder charges against him were dismissed, and he was freed. However, his freedom didn't last long. As soon as he left the courthouse, federal immigration officers arrested him for violating U.S. immigration laws. A background check revealed that there was no record of American citizenship for someone named Olivier Adela. It turned out his real name was Mustafa Traore, and he had been living in the United States illegally for 20 years using forged documents and a stolen identity. He had fraudulently obtained U.S. citizenship, and much of his life story, including his claimed service in the French Foreign Legion, was false. After his arrest, Mustafa was transferred to a federal detention facility and charged with document fraud and identity theft. Unlike the Keith Green case, this trial attracted little public attention. During the hearings, Mustafa confessed that he had been using a fake name since the early 2000s. He explained to the court that he was forced to leave his country of origin because of traumatic experiences he had as a child. He said that when he was 9 years old, he was stabbed in the face while trying to protect his mother from an abusive attack by soldiers. His family escaped twice, first from Liberia, and then from the Ivory Coast. Mustafa said he changed his name and nationality to begin a new life, escape threats, and build a more secure future for his family. He insisted that he had never used the false identity to commit acts of violence and that his employment in the U.S. had always been legal. The court proceedings focused solely on immigration violations, not on the circumstances of Keith Green's death. Mustafa was found guilty of using forged documents and sentenced to 6 months in prison. The judge took into account his confession, cooperation with law enforcement, lack of a violent criminal record, and his personal history. The judge added that he hoped never to see Mustafa in court again and urged him not to revert to his old ways. This turn of events cast doubt on the reliability of Mustafa's testimony in the Green case. The concealment of his true identity, un invérifiable past, and his role as a witness with clear personal stakes all weakened the prosecution's position. None of the people connected to the events of 2016 ever gave a direct confession to committing the crime. On November 4, 2019, in San Mateo County, a jury found Tiffany Lee and Cavey Bayat not guilty in the death of Keith Green, despite a 3-year investigation, a widely publicized trial, and extensive testimony. prosecutors were unable to prove their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The verdict shocked Green's family and led to significant media coverage and debate. Many journalists and people believe the verdict showed a serious problem with the justice system. The evidence: blood in a car, secret text messages, matching location data, and testimony from Mustafa made the acquittal seem illogical. However, the defense successfully weakened the prosecution's case by highlighting the lack of clear proof, the questionable nature of the evidence, and the untrustworthiness of a main witness who had lied about who he was. After Kaveh Bayat's acquittal, the district attorney decided not to retry him. Considering the previous verdict and the unlikelihood of a different outcome, they closed the case. While the legal case ended, Keith Green's family struggle continued. Colleen, the mother of Keith, sued Tiffany for emotional distress and financial losses resulting from her son's death. The lawsuit also concerned the future Keith's daughters. The court ruled that Tiffany Lee must pay more than $100,000 in damages. Custody of Keith's daughters was awarded to Tiffany's relatives. Once the case was resolved and her travel restrictions lifted, Tiffany left the United States. Media reports indicated she relocated to China. Her exact location and activities remain unknown, but sources claim she was living in a jurisdiction with no extradition treaty. She has never given an interview and has not publicly revisited the case. The Keith Green case made many people think the American justice system is unfair. News stories compared Green's case to other cases where rich people seem to get away with crimes, like assault or financial fraud. However, unlike other cases, there was no clear evidence to convict Tiffany. For Keith's family, neither public outrage nor a civil judgment could replace the one thing they wanted most: a sense of justice. Keith Green was laid to rest without a definitive answer to the question of who pulled the trigger. And his daughters, who lost their father, were left with memories clouded by unanswered questions.